I need to be honest about how I got there, because the rock bottom part of this story is the part people skip, and it's the part that actually matters. I wasn't unemployed because I was lazy. I want to say that clearly, because I think there's a harmful myth that people who end up broke simply didn't try hard enough. I had tried. I'd worked a stable job for 3 years, saved carefully, and then made one decision that unraveled everything. I put almost my entire savings into a business partnership with a friend I trusted completely. 8 months later, that friend disappeared with the remaining funds. The business folded, and I was left holding a lease I couldn't pay, a stack of unpaid invoices from vendors who trusted me personally, and a bank account with $11 in it. I want to be specific about what that actually looked like day to day, because I think people romanticize rock bottom without understanding its texture. It looked like calculating whether I could afford both bus fare and a coffee, and choosing the bus fare. It looked like avoiding certain streets because I didn't want to run into people who knew what had happened to me. It looked like lying awake doing math in my head. Rent due in 6 days, $11, no clear plan, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. I'm telling you this part in detail because if you're somewhere close to that right now, I want you to know I'm not speaking from theory. I'm speaking from 11 actual dollars. Here's the first thing that changed everything, and it's not glamorous. I stopped waiting until I had a perfect plan before I acted. For weeks after the business collapsed, I'd been sitting in my apartment researching business models, researching the best side hustle, researching whether I should go back to school, start over in a new city, pivot industries entirely. I was consuming enormous amounts of information and producing zero forward motion. One night, a friend, one of the few who'd stuck around, said something to me that I still think about constantly. You're not stuck because you don't know enough. You're stuck because you haven't done anything imperfect yet. That sentence stung because it was true. I had turned research into a socially acceptable form of procrastination. Researching felt productive. It felt responsible. But it was actually just fear wearing a disguise. The next morning, I took the first imperfect action available to me. I had some skill in graphic design from my old job. Nothing impressive, nothing I would have called monetizable a month earlier. And I posted in 3 local business Facebook groups, offering to design simple logos for $50 each. Not because $50 was my dream price, because $50 was achievable, and achievable beat perfect. I got my first client 4 days later. $50. It felt like winning the lottery. That $50 is where the second lesson comes in. And it's one most get-rich content actively works against because it's boring. I treated small amounts of money with the same seriousness I eventually treated large amounts. I didn't spend that $50 on anything except the absolute essentials. I didn't treat it as finally some breathing room money. I treated it as capital. I used part of it to buy a slightly better version of design software because it let me take on more complex projects at a higher rate. This is the part people skip when they imagine a 0 to 1 million story. They imagine some single dramatic pivot, one big client, one viral moment, one lucky break. The truth is far less cinematic. It was $50, then $200 from 3 clients the following week, then $800 the month after that, compounding slowly, unglamorously, because I refused to treat any of it as disposable. I lived for almost a year on significantly less than I was earning, even as the numbers slowly climbed, not out of some rigid ideology about frugality, but because I understood something that took me a painful business failure to actually learn. Money you don't respect when it's small, you won't respect when it's large either. The habits are the asset, not the number. About 5 months in, I was working brutal hours for what still amounted to a modest income. I was good at what I did by then, genuinely good. Client after client said so. But I was massively underpricing myself because some part of me still believed I hadn't earned the right to charge more. A client, oddly enough, is the one who pushed me past this. She'd hired me for a $50 logo and came back for a full brand package. When I quoted her my usual modest rate, she paused and said, "You know you're charging less than half of what agencies charge for this, right? I'd have paid 3 times what you're asking." That comment rearranged something in my head. I raised my prices by 60% the next week, not out of confidence, but almost as an experiment, half expecting to lose most of my client pipeline. I lost exactly one potential client. Everyone else paid the new rate without.
That was the moment I understood something that changed the trajectory of everything that followed. Undercharging isn't humility. It's usually just fear dressed up as modesty, and it costs you far more than the extra money. It costs you the ability to do fewer, better projects for clients who actually value the work. I raised my prices twice more over the following year, each time later than I should have, each time with the same nervous anticipation of losing everyone, each time proven wrong. For the first year and a half, every dollar I made required my direct personal labor. That model has a hard ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day, and I was already working most of them. The fourth decision was the hardest because it meant temporarily earning less in order to build something bigger. I started documenting my design process, the systems I'd built for pricing, client communication, project structure, and turned it into a course for freelance designers who were exactly where I'd been
18 months earlier. I want to be honest, the course was not an overnight success. My first launch made $430 total from 6 students after 2 months of work building it. If you're doing the math, that's a genuinely bad hourly rate. I remember feeling embarrassed about it, like I'd made a mistake diverting time away from client work. But something happened that pure client work never could have produced. Those $430 kept coming in, month after month, from students who found the course through word of mouth, without me doing any additional work for it. It was slow, it was unglamorous, but it was the first time I understood, in my bones rather than in theory, the difference between trading time for money and building something that earned independently of my hours. Over the following 2 years, that course refined, expanded, eventually joined by a second course and a small membership community, became the majority of my income, while my design client work became optional rather than mandatory. Here's the part that I think actually explains the gap between people who reach a milestone like this and people who don't, and it has almost nothing to do with talent, luck, or strategy. There was an 18-month stretch.
Here's the part that I think actually explains the gap between people who reach a milestone like this and people who don't, and it has almost nothing to do with talent, luck, or strategy. There was an 18-month stretch, roughly in year 2 and 3, where nothing dramatic happened. No big breakthroughs, no viral moments, just steady, incremental, occasionally frustrating growth. A little more revenue this month, a plateau the next, a small dip the month after that from a refund wave I didn't see coming. This is the stretch that almost no one talks about, because it's not an interesting stretch to talk about. There's no clean narrative arc to, I kept doing roughly the same things for 18 months while the numbers moved up slowly and unevenly. But it's the actual substance of almost every real success story once you get past the highlight reel. I distinctly remember a period around month 22 where I seriously considered going back to a stable salaried job purely because the boredom and uncertainty of slow, steady growth felt worse emotionally than the sharp pain of the initial collapse it felt. Rock bottom at least had adrenaline. This just had spreadsheets and patience. I stayed anyway, not because I had some unshakable faith that it would work out. I didn't. Most days I genuinely wasn't sure, but because I'd already survived my actual worst-case scenario once with $11 in my account, and I understood that whatever happened next couldn't be worse than me. I didn't find out I'd crossed $1 million in net worth through some dramatic notification or celebration. I found out doing my quarterly finances, the same boring spreadsheet routine I'd done every 3 months for 4 years, adding up business assets, savings, and investments the way I'd learned to after nearly losing everything the first time. I stared at the number for a long moment, genuinely